The Lord of the Rings. As the name suggests, the story is about rings and the lord of those. Mostly it's about one ring in particular, though that lord is not mentioned that much in the story compared to other characters. We learn actually very little about him. As I once explained in my Who is Sauron video, Sauron, the Lord of the Rings, is less a character and more of a construct that generates the motivational foundation, together with the One Ring, for the main characters and friends to go on their journey and overcome all sorts of problems and grow as their hero's journey or monomyth story progresses. Though I would maybe argue Lord of the Rings is at least a bit unusual in some ways when it comes to the monomyth, but that is a topic for another video, I guess. Small disclaimer. I will pronounce names as Tolkien described it, that is why I truly are so much. Shoutouts to the artists for allowing me to use their artwork, like Kimberly80, Ted Nesmith, Jenny Dolphin and Sara Morello. Spoiler warning, and originally I wanted to cover the 7 and 9 rings in this video together, but seeing the length I decided to split it up. Also, I started writing this video before Amazon announced the title for their show, called The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Happy incident, to be honest. Besides the One Ring, there are also 19 other great rings of power, which I want to cover on my channel over time. Today we focus on the 7 rings of the dwarves, and I plan to make separate videos about the other rings, in case you wonder. There is also the mention of lesser rings of power, but to my knowledge we never hear anything of those. So there will be more videos. If there just would be a technology that informs you in some way and reliable when I upload new lore videos on this channel in the future, it would be a game changer. As we already learned in my Elrond and the Second Age video, or the much shorter Círdan and the History of the Elves video, the second Dark Lord Sauron developed a plan to corrupt the elves. For this, he would contact the elves and teach them to make rings of power, so those elves with the biggest influence will wear those. Then he would produce a master ring himself in secret to bring the minds of those under his own will. Tolkien explains that Sauron's plan was to rule over Middle-earth, bringing it under his will and establish his vision of order. Also, as a former servant of Aule, the Vala or High Angel of smithing and crafting, he had the needed knowledge, which was further refined when he became the servant of the first Dark Lord, Morgoth. I should add, Sauron was a Maya, a powerful spirit being or angel of low rank himself. Interestingly, he shares the background as Maya of Aule with Saruman, or Kuromo as he was called on the west continent Aman. According to a unique unusual source, the Parma Eldalamberon, which contains some of Tolkien's etymology notes and word lists with some explanations, Sauron was originally called Maeron when he was still a servant of Aule. Sauron knew men were easy to bring under his will. He already did that to some degree, and so did his master Morgoth. They always had influence on, for example, some or many tribes of the Easterlings, and even on the original group of men after they awoke in Hildorien, according to a text of Tolkien that contains the dialogue between the wise woman Andres and Galadriel's brother Finrod, published in Morgoth's Ring. Elves, in contrast, were not so easily deceived, but they would be, in addition by their nature, much more powerful servants. In addition, at that time, in the first half of the Second Age, the elves were still powerful in Middle-earth and were a threat for Sauron as a result. The Dark Lord said it himself: "A mighty king is Gil-galad." Gil-galad was the High King of one of the 3 great elven clans, the Noldor, living in his realm Lindon in Middle-earth. It seems he was also quite wise. As a result, when Sauron approached the High King, taking the fairest form possible for him, calling himself Anatar, that translates to Lord of Gifts, and posing as an ambassador from the west continent Aman, Gil-galad and his wise advisors Elrond and I assume Círdan rejected him or his messengers. They did not see through his disguise though, but felt something was wrong. But Sauron did not let himself get discouraged. He tried it again with the elven realm next door, which was Eregion. Celebrimbor was a leading figure there, and also his guild of jewelsmiths, the Gwais y Myrdain, which means people of the jewelsmiths. Celebrimbor was from an important elven family line. In some versions of the text, he is the grandson of Fëanor, the greatest elven craftsman of all time, who for example made the Palantiri according to Lord of the Rings, or the 3 Silmarilli. We find that story in the Silmarillion and large parts of it are about them. Or invented the elven script Tengwar, which we see on the One Ring too. As a result, Celebrimbor had ambitions fitting to his line too, though he distanced himself a bit from his crazy grandfather and was quite different in my opinion. But the opportunity of receiving new knowledge and crafting something truly unique, powerful and unusual got his interest, and he started to trust Anatar. Galadriel also lived most likely in Eregion with her husband Celeborn and her daughter Celebrian at this time too. In some versions of the text telling this story, she also did not trust Anatar, but was also not able to identify him. This led to conflict between her and the jewelsmiths in Eregion, and she left with her daughter. In one version, Celeborn stays behind for the time being, observing what is going on there. In some of those versions, she had a son as well, which was Amros. But here we quickly come into canon debate. I discuss the contradicting texts about this time in a lot of detail in the Elrond and the Second Age video. It's a complex but interesting topic. I also plan a video about Galadriel in the future. And with Galadriel gone, Sauron managed to get the influence over the leading elves that he needed and taught them how to make those rings of power. Then he left, and Celebrimbor made in secret 3 great rings of power as his masterpieces, which were still based on Sauron's designs but not touched by him. They are completed around 90 years after Sauron left Eregion. They also had a maybe slightly different purpose. Sauron then forged the Master Ring and completed it around 10 years after the 3 rings of Celebrimbor were created, and put into it his will and a big portion of his power. It is known as the One Ring, and its purpose is to bring those who wear a ring of power under the will of its master. If you ask how the rings looked, each were golden rings, and we can read, "The 9, the 7 and the 3, he said, had each their proper gem. Not so the one, it was round and unadorned, as it were one of the lesser rings, but its maker set marks upon it that the skilled, maybe, could still see and read." But Sauron underestimated the will of the elves, and when he used the One Ring, they perceived who Anatar actually was and his evil schemes as well. They stopped wearing their rings of power before Sauron could bring them under his will, which made the Dark Lord quite angry. Then he just attacked Eregion with a giant army and gathered the rings of power, which still were powerful artifacts. He could get all of them except the 3 secret rings of Celebrimbor, because he sent them away in time. 2 to Gil-galad and 1 to Galadriel. Celebrimbor would not reveal where he hid those to Sauron under torment and was put to death. Still, Sauron got 16 or 15 rings out of his attack and could guess that Celebrimbor has sent at least 1 of the 3 to Gil-galad. He continued his war and tried to conquer Middle-earth by attacking Lindon, where his most powerful foe ruled. In the end, the Dark Lord failed again quite closely because the High King allied with the Men of the West, or Dúnedain from Númenor, who sent very powerful fleets to help the elves. They were delayed and arrived very late in the war, but surprised the Dark Lord. Sauron could fight the dwarves, elves and men of Middle-earth at the same time and win, but the highly advanced Númenorians were one foe too many for him, and so he was defeated, but still escaped with the 16 or 15 rings of power. The number 16 or 15 I mentioned a few times depends on if Celebrimbor himself gifted one of the rings of power made in Eregion to his dwarven friends in Moria, to King Durin III to be precise. This detail is mentioned in Lord of the Rings Appendix A, but it's only told by the dwarves it seems, though it would make sense because in contrast to the feud of elves and dwarves, due to the dwarves killing Thingol, the first king of the Sindar elves, over one of the Silmarilli and the necklace they made, which led to the revenge of the elves, the dwarves of the house of Durin from Moria and the Noldor elves of Eregion had a great friendship and influenced each other in a positive way. Quote, so that Eregion became far stronger and Khazad-dûm far more beautiful than either would have done alone. The actual name of Moria is Khazad-dûm, and all this is the short version. Those 16 or 15 rings of power Sauron later somehow gifted to other people, 7 or 6 to the Dwarf-kings and 9 to Lords of Men, who will later become the Nazgûl, the 9 ring race. When it comes to the 3 elven rings, 2 had Gil-galad, which he gave to Elrond and Círdan at some point, and 1 had Galadriel. This is the basic outline of the story, but I want to discuss what the rings actually do and some other details. First of all, how did the dwarves get those 6 or 7 rings from Sauron, and how were 4 of them destroyed by dragons? That is sadly not known. It's even unclear which dwarves got the rings, or if all 7 houses of the dwarves got a ring each, which is very likely, but in my opinion not explicitly stated. We discussed this in the Elrond and the Second Age video already. This quote implies a bit that the 7 houses had a ring each, I guess, quote from the Silmarillion. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring. 7 hordes, and we know there are 7 houses of the dwarves. This implies it a bit, considering that only dwarf kings possessed them, and that one house might have only had one dwarf king and one horde at a time, but of course, in theory, one house could have had, for example, 2 hordes and also 2 rings, but I would also see this as extremely unlikely, though one has to keep in mind it's worded carefully with "it is said," maybe because the dwarves kept many things of their culture secret, especially the rings, at least the house of Durin, the Longbeards, quote from the Lord of the Rings Appendix A. But the possessor of the dwarven ring of power did not display it or speak of it, and they seldom surrendered it until near death, so that others did not know for certain where it was bestowed. In addition, this text was written inside the world of Tolkien by a non-dwarvish source, so how does the source know about the rings anyway? Maybe it was a rumor of its time or written much later? The only person who seems to know a bit about the dwarven rings was Gandalf, who only came to Middle-earth around 3rd Age 1000, and he had a very good relationship with the dwarves, and also found Thorin's father Thróin imprisoned by Sauron in Dol Guldur, though Gandalf only later understood that it was actually Thróin because the tormented dwarf he found in Sauron's secret hideout around 3rd Age 2850 didn't even know his own name anymore, and he had to piece the information together later. Thróin was imprisoned around 3rd Age 2845, so 5 years before. As a result, if Gandalf is the only source for this information, it was written down very late in the 3rd Age, around 4000 years after the dwarf received the rings. This makes it also reasonable why there is so little knowledge about Durin's ring, later called the Ring of Thrór, and also the other rings. It should also be noted that in one old draft version, Thróin went to Dol Guldur to find this ring. We find it in Peoples of Middle-earth, but this seems to be just a short thought of Tolkien. Thróin was also in some versions Thrór's father and not his son, etc. The development of this is quite interesting, but not our topic today. Interesting side note, in the first Hobbit film we see Thróin missing an eye, and in the extended version of the second film we see him in Dol Guldur having both eyes again, though this time he is missing a finger, which is to my knowledge not implied in the books. Little continuation mistake, I guess. The Seven Rings were a big secret, and as a result there is a ton of uncertainty. We also find another comment of Gandalf in the Council of Elrond, that 4 of the 7 rings were consumed by dragons, so there seems to be additional knowledge of Gandalf. In my opinion, this could have been only possible in a time of increased dragon activity. A candidate for this is for sure the attack of dragons in the Grey Mountains. Appendix B in Lord of the Rings mentions 3rd Age 2570 for this. Quote, "About this time dragons reappear in the far north and begin to afflict the dwarves." We can read in Appendix A that Dáin, that is not Dáin Ironfoot, and his second son Thrór were slain at the doors of his hall by a great cold drake. I always imagine an ice drake in this cold region, but I guess it means a drake that does not breathe fire. As a result, the dwarves abandoned the Grey Mountains. Dáin's third son Thrór went to the Iron Hills, and I assume became a leading figure there. He is an ancestor of Dáin Ironfoot, and the first son of Dáin the First, Thrór, the grandfather of Thorin Oakenshield, returned to Erebor. You might ask, why returned? Thrór already tried to establish a realm there before and got the Arkenstone, but then left for the Grey Mountains. I often thought that this dragon incident in the Grey Mountains could be a possible option for dragons consuming some of the 7 rings, but with closer observation this seems unlikely. At this time there was only one Dwarf King mentioned there to my knowledge, which is Dáin the First, and he was a Longbeard, that is the house of Durin or Durin's folk. So why would there be kings of the other dwarven houses as well? In addition, the ring of Dáin the First was the ring of Durin, or later known as the ring of Thrór, which Thróin inherited and Sauron later captured him and got it back as mentioned. So it's one of the rings that got not destroyed, and it's the only one of which we know what happened to it as well. So it seems strange that 4 other rings were destroyed there when the ring of Dáin the First survived. Of course, the conflict with the dragons probably went on for some time, and maybe other houses helped to fight the dragons too, and potentially here the rings were destroyed, but cold drakes would also not be able to consume them in fire. Though only one cold drake is explicitly mentioned, the one who slew Dáin and his second son. There could be fire-breathing drakes too, I guess, but you see how it seems unlikely. Every information we have does not really align well with the destruction of the 4 rings. I guess a fundamental problem is that we don't know anything about the other Dwarf Kings or where their realms were. Some might speculate that the Iron Hills were another realm with a Dwarf King from another house, but as we learned, Thrór, also a Longbeard, goes there, and later we have Dáin Ironfoot being a leader there. From The Hobbit we know he had 500 dwarves under his command and came to help Thorin in the story of The Hobbit. There's also a mention that more dwarves could come, but I think it's never said that he was the king of the Iron Hills. His ancestors are also not marked as kings in Appendix A, though the mark is just for kings of Durin's folk. I assume they were just lords who also had dwarves under their command. So the Iron Hills had either an unknown dwarf king, whom Thrór, his son Nóin and his grandson Dáin Ironfoot served, or none at all, but that's pure speculation by my side. As a result, I sadly can't tell you who those dwarf kings were, how many there were, where their kingdoms were, where the 7 dwarf hordes were located, and how and when 4 of the rings of power of those dwarf kings were destroyed by dragons. It's all a huge mystery. In my opinion, there must have been unrecorded attacks by dragons somewhere for those rings to be destroyed. If that was the case, the biggest question is, how does Gandalf know all that? We know he journeyed far and had contact with the dwarves, and during The Hobbit he went with some quite important dwarves, some might have been related to other dwarven houses, on an adventure, so he might have gotten the information from them, though, as we learned, the rings were a great secret even among the dwarves, so how could he be so sure that 4 rings were destroyed? I guess it's still Gandalf and he knows things. Istari means those who know, according to letter 156. Also, the dwarves present during the Council of Elrond did not correct Gandalf, and they had high status, so they could have known about the destruction of those rings, I guess. Further analysis of the few information we have about the 7 houses of the dwarves also leads to some interesting conclusions by my side. We can read in Peoples of Middle-earth about the 7 dwarven houses. First, we have the mentioned Longbeards, that is Durin's folk, or the House of Durin as mentioned, and they have their origin in Gundabad, where Durin the First, or Durin the Deathless, awoke, and then he founded Moria, so their origin is in the Misty Mountains and Friends. Then we have the Firebeards and Broadbeams, who were from the Blue Mountains in the west, and last we have the Iron Fists and Stiffbeards in one unknown place in the east, and the Blacklocks and Stonefoots from another unknown place in the east. One could assume maybe the Iron Hills were one of those eastern places, but we don't know. Tolkien explains further in Peoples of Middle-earth, the other 2 places were eastward at distances as great or greater than that between the Blue Mountains and Gundabad. From the First Age we know of the dwarven realms Belegost and Novgorod, which were in a mountain range that would later, due to the destruction of Beleriand in the War of Wrath that ended the First Age, form the Blue Mountains we know from the Second and Third Age. As a side note, the original mountain ranges were also called Blue Mountains and Ered Lindon. I would assume those 2 realms there were the realms of the Firebeards and Broadbeams. Of course, there was for sure mixing between the dwarves anyway. However, if we now assume that a small dwarven realm was left in the Blue Mountains in the Second Age and later, which is not clear, Sauron would need to bring those rings of power deep into enemy territory if he wanted to give them there, because the Blue Mountains are right next to Lindon, where Gil-galad resided. That seems very risky. What if the messenger of Sauron with the rings gets caught by the elves? In addition, we know that Sauron retrieved 3 of the remaining dwarven rings later. The other 4 were destroyed. We only know how he got 1 of the 3 remaining rings back. If 1 or 2 remained in the Blue Mountains, they would be, in my opinion, very difficult to retrieve, and he was never really powerful in that region again, except when the Witch King established his realm Angmar there in the Third Age, which was maybe the only opportunity to get those rings of power back, if they ever were in the Blue Mountains in the first place. On top of that, we don't know of any dragon activity in that region either, so having the rings there consumed by dragonfire also does not seem to be an option. It is also possible that there simply was no dwarven realm at all after the First Age. Arvedui, the last king of Arthedain, a leftover kingdom of Arnor, hides in, quote, the tunnels of the old dwarf mines near the far end of the mountains around Third Age 1974. But he has no contact with dwarf there and really needed help. Thorin Oakenshield and his father Thróin later established a hall in the Blue Mountains, but we need other dwarf kings who possess those rings, so it would be strange if there were already realms of dwarf kings and they just formed a new one. All this makes the Blue Mountains a very unlikely place for 1 or 2 of those other dwarven rings of power. Of course, Durin's ring was there while Thróin lived there, but as said, we neither have dragon activity there, nor would it have been easy for Sauron to retrieve any rings from there, so I see it as unlikely candidate for a ring location. We can also read in the Unfinished Tales, There were and always remained some dwarves on the eastern side of Eret Lindon, where the very ancient mansions of Norgrod and Belegost had been, not far from Nenuyal, but they had transferred most of their strength to Khazad Dûm. This leaves us with the unknown regions in the east, but that would mean that 6 rings were with an unknown number of dwarf kings of only 4 houses. Here, though, the information we have is so limited that I can't really draw conclusions. Maybe some dwarves lived in the Orokarni, the Red Mountains. The only dwarven leaders from realms in the east we know are Dáin Ironfoot, his father Nóin, and his grandfather Gror, and those were all Longbeards as well, and at least no kings of Durin's folk except Dáin Ironfoot later. I don't see that they had a ring of power. In addition, we know Sauron later had the remaining 3 rings before the Council of Elrond, and Gror died of old age. Nóin was slain by Azog, but the battle was won and Azog slain by Dáin Ironfoot, and Dáin Ironfoot died later in the War of the Ring when the remaining rings were already in Sauron's possession, so he could not have gotten a ring from one of them. As a result, we are left in pure speculation territory about the dwarves in the east. They at least could have had dragon activity there, which would allow to explain the destruction of 4 of the rings and us not knowing about it. From this, I would even conclude that Sauron gifted 6 of the 7 rings into the east, where he also had more influence anyway, at least over men. But we also find the mention of wicked dwarves in, for example, the Hobbit book, who might have even helped Sauron, so maybe he used them to befriend some dwarf kings in the east? There's also the mention that the dwarves had delegates at Mount Gundabad and met there. Some speculate that it would be a good opportunity for Sauron to appear there too and gift the rings, but in the same text it's mentioned that Gundabad was probably occupied by orcs around this time in the Second Age. Of course, Sauron could have gifted the rings to the dwarves much later than the 9 to men, but it would surprise me if it was not in the Second Age. In addition, dwarves and orcs fought often over Gundabad because for the dwarves, especially the Longbeards, it's a culturally important place. I don't see them accepting gifts there from their chief enemy. The Longbeards also opposed Sauron and would have for sure tried to prevent him gifting rings to other houses at the meeting in Gundabad. Of course, he could have disguised himself, etc., but still, I think it's unlikely. In my imagination, Sauron made contact to the dwarves in the east directly, where he had most influence in the region anyway, and his evil deeds and wars with the west were maybe too far away to make those dwarves suspicious. How the Longbeards got their ring is strange though. I like the idea of them getting their ring by Celebrimbor directly, when he and his guild made those rings of power, but it has one problem as well. In this case, Durin III got his ring long before the others, and Sauron must have known that the ring of power had not the effect on the dwarves that he would have wished for, and that they only became more greedy but not servants under his will. Sauron was later for sure not happy about the dwarves being so resilient against his domination, and he hated them for attacking his rear when he attacked Eregion back in the day. But if the Longbeards in Moria possessed a ring of power for such a long time already, the Dark Lord must have known that he could not control the king of the Longbeards with his one ring. So gifting 6 rings to other dwarf kings makes little sense later. This might be an indicator that it was not true what the dwarves claimed, and in this case there must have been a phase among the Longbeards where they had contact with Sauron as well in some form, accepting his ring. Quite mysterious, but of course another reason might be that Tolkien never found the time to expand on these details in his writings, which is unfortunate. Still, this might be at least a reason why the dwarves came up with this story. I already hinted at it, but what did the Rings of Power actually do? In case of the dwarves, not that much. In Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings we can read: The only power over them, the dwarves, that the rings wielded was to inflame their hearts with a greed of gold and precious things, so that if they lacked them, all other good things seemed profitless, and they were filled with wrath and desire for vengeance on all who deprived them. But they were made from their beginning of a kind to resist most steadfastly any domination. Though they could be slain or broken, they could not be reduced to shadows enslaved to another will, and for the same reason their lives were not affected by any ring to live either longer or shorter because of it. In the Silmarillion we find a very similar description, so it had very little effect on the dwarves, it just increased their greed. We can also read that it helped to enhance their wealth, but it needed gold to breed gold. How this worked exactly is not known, but I assume it was forcing them to focus on their business and maybe help them making good decisions. Potentially it helped even finding gold in the mountains. I don't think there was a magical ability to generate gold out of thin air when gold was around. Needed gold to breed gold sounds like an initial investment that would grow into wealth by the work of the dwarves. That gold leads to some evil is also no surprise, because we can read in Morgoth's ring that the first Dark Lord and Sauron's former master Morgoth put his power inside the world itself, except the oceans, and that it could spread, for example, through gold. Tolkien even mentions all gold in Middle-earth seems to have had a specially evil trend, but not silver. As a result, the power of the rings had a negative effect on the dwarves, and so had the gold they collected. They hoarded gold, which lured dragons to their hoards, or they dug too deep, searching for more, and awoke a Balrog, a powerful ancient evil entity and servant of Morgoth, which is what happened in Moria. In a way, the rings of power are also a shortcut to power, which is part of the philosophical concept Tolkien called the machine. The rings, though, had the backdoor for the wearer falling under the will of Sauron, using the Master Ring, the One Ring. Still, they granted power too, and as such, they also brought some power and, in my opinion, increased certain traits of the wearer. That they granted power we can see with Sauron gathering those remaining rings and holding them himself. Quote, "The 9 he has gathered to himself, the 7 also, or else they are destroyed." Tolkien also hints at this in letter 246, which is only a draft though. Interestingly, Lord of the Rings has multiple hints that Sauron seems to physically hold the remaining rings of power later, but one that contradicts this impression. Quote, "The 9 the Nazgul keep." Further, we find this also in the Unfinished Tales as well. But when it comes to how that power of the rings might look, we can read about the 9 rings of men in the Silmarillion. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. The powerful among men are kings and warriors and those who collect advanced knowledge, like for example sorcerers. We can also read they obtained wealth as well, like the dwarves, but while the dwarves were not affected much, men would also receive prolonged life, could enter the unseen aspect of the world, become invisible, and see the unseen, which they could not before, and would grant for sure knowledge, but also would slowly turn them into wraiths, and they would be deceived by the phantoms and delusions of Sauron in the unseen. Still, the benefits or powers of it were distantly similar and fitting the nature of men, while the power of the elven rings was different. We can read they granted understanding, making and healing to preserve all things unstained, aspects important to elves. Still, we can see how those elven rings have a similar design. They improve certain aspects of the wearer as well, but about the other rings we will talk in another video. The dwarven rings remain quite mysterious, except one, the Ring of Durin, which we know quite well. and potentially the later success and wealth of Moria was certainly influenced by it, and as a result, its doom was influenced by it too, or at least the process that would lead to the downfall of Moria through Durin's bane was accelerated by the ring. And maybe even the terrible fate of Thorin's father Thróin II too, because he was not fully happy with what he has built in the Blue Mountains and wanted to take Moria back. He was captured on his way by Sauron's servants, imprisoned, tormented, and his ring of power taken away from him by Sauron in Dol Guldur until he was found by Gandalf, who investigated the ruins. Still, the ring was now in the hands of Sauron. His father Thrór also went to explore Moria, planning on taking the kingdom back, but was captured there by Azog and murdered, which enraged the other dwarves and led to the war of dwarves and orcs, which the dwarves won, but at the costs of many dwarven lives. The ring continued to bring doom over the dwarves further. In the Council of Elrond we learn that Balin, in hope of finding the ring of Thrór in Moria, went there too. The dwarves thought Thrór took the ring with him to Moria, where it was lost, but what they did not know, Thrór gave it to his son Thróin II before he left. Balin did not find the ring as a result, and only found death in Moria. The Fellowship of the Ring would find his grave there later. In a way, Sauron might not have gotten direct control over the dwarves, but the rings for sure brought a lot of death, suffering, and despair over them. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and that I could uncover some unusual perspectives and conclusions to this topic that you might not have heard before. As you might have noticed, I went with the Old Norse pronunciation for dwarven names, so I say Dáin instead of Dáin, in case people wonder. See my video about pronunciation for more details on that. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments and leave a like. I'm also curious what your theories are how the dwarves got the rings. And of course, I need to reveal there is a technology to notify you when I upload more lore videos, but it sometimes does not feel very reliable though. Just click on subscribe. If you still had not enough, maybe check my other videos too. There are playlists with my recommended and best lore videos. Who is Círdan and the History of the Elves is a classic on this channel, or my recent project the Who is Elrond video, which got so big that even I had to split it in multiple parts, and each part is over 2 hours long so far. It's a crazy project and the Third Age is still left to cover. But I also make shorter videos that are like 15 to 20 minutes. The History of the Hobbits is a pretty decent one if you haven't seen it. Give it a try. Not sure what will be next on this channel. Who is Elrond and the Third Age is in the works, but it will still take some time. There are some collaborations with other channels coming up as well. I often get asked, the Film and Books Analysis and Differences series will also continue too. I hope soon, but expect shorter videos. I also think about making more podcast episodes, but I'm too busy right now, but it will return. If you are into gaming, I also have a small gaming related channel and stream on Twitch from time to time. Currently, I play through Dark Souls 3 with soul level 1 and without leveling up as preparation for Elden Ring, and there will be some Elden Ring content next month too. Also, all links you can find in the description. Shoutouts and big thanks to all who support me. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.